Okay, so that's us in public session. So we're moving to item number 4, draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings of our last meeting, page 78 to 84 of the meeting pack? Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting 3rd October 2024 are a true reflection of proceedings? Mm-hmm. Content? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, matters arising. No matters arising. Okay, so we're moving then on to item 6, which is Regulation EU 2024-2516, digital labelling of EU fertilising products, departmental evidence. So just to inform members, this item will be recorded by Hansard. Can I refer everyone to the relevant pages in our meeting pack, page 5 to 77 of the meeting pack? I advise members that in this initial assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found pages 50 to 72 of the meeting pack. So can I welcome Alan Lunn, Fertiliser Policy, Environmental Policy Branch of DAERA, and Brian Irvine, Head of Environmental Planning, Environmental Policy Branch of DAERA. So thank you very much, gentlemen. You're both very welcome. And if you want to provide an assessment of the new regulation.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think maybe it would be helpful to the committee to explain a bit of background about fertilisers and how they're labelled and what the market is here in Northern Ireland. Look, Northern Ireland is a large agricultural sector, so we rely heavily on fertilisers, and those are imported because there's no actual chemical fertilisers manufactured here in Northern Ireland. There's certainly, it's blended into different compounds and so on, but the vast majority comes in as ready-made product. And in terms of the quantities, last year there were 220,000 tonnes of fertiliser imported into Northern Ireland. Now, that's down on the historical trend, and 4 years ago it was over 300,000 tonnes. But in a way, that's a good thing, because if it's coming down and agricultural output is maintained, then fertilisers are being used more efficiently. And in our agricultural systems, of course, the other part of the fertiliser inputs, as well as the chemical fertilisers, is of course livestock manures, and they're a very valuable fertiliser. So going forward, from both an efficiency point of view and an environmental point of view, if better use is made of livestock manures, then there's less need for chemical fertiliser. But with any fertilisers, you want to use them as efficiently as possible. So therefore, the information that's on a label and that comes with a fertiliser is very important. In terms of the packaging and labelling, fertilisers would often come in bulk, but then be packaged, and quite often farmers will use large quantities, so they'll be in big bulk bags, and those bags will maybe be 600 kilos, and there's a couple of hard copies there just for the committee to pass around, and apologies to the members attending online, but it's just to give an indication of what the packaging is like, but also the labels, and you'll see there's a lot of information now on a label. So the point of the digital labelling of fertiliser is to clean up the labels, make them easier, and have the essential information on those, but there's more detailed information can be available on a digital label. So that's the concept behind this. Now, what's driving it as well is that chemical fertilisers are usually either a straight nutrient such as nitrogen, or will have a mixture of various nutrients, and that content is relatively easily specified. But we're now moving over time to more different types of fertilisers that would be organic fertilisers that are manufactured from, for example, from manures and blended to get certain nutrient compositions. So those are more complex fertilisers, and they're coming along, and the current EU regulation, the EU fertilising products regulations, which this digital labelling is a proposed amendment to that, that really has come along to take account of these other newer fertilisers that have been made from organics, and those get more complicated, and hence the use and need for digital labels, because you would end up with a very, very big label on a bag. So that's the main concept of it. In terms of the regulation of fertilisers, it's partially harmonised. So what that means is the EU regulations apply, but also fertilisers can be marketed under UK regulations. And as well as the UK regime, which is basically the retained EU regulations, the old regulation, which was 2003. There's also fertilisers can be marketed under the Northern Ireland Fertiliser Regulations 1992. So there's dual regulation, and fertiliser manufacturers can choose to market under the EU regs or the UK regime and those Northern Ireland regulations. So there's a choice of whether, if you go down the EU line, there's a choice whether to use digital labels or not. But equally so, in that EU regulation, marketing under that, the use of digital labels will be entirely voluntary. It's not mandatory. So there's a lot of choice here for fertiliser suppliers and manufacturers. Now, in reality, fertilisers, many of them are big international commodities produced by large companies and traded across the EU and across the world. So a lot of what will come in here will not be specific for the Northern Ireland market. It'll be a bulk commodity, and it's likely in future that certainly the big companies will probably adopt digital labelling to some extent. I'm already aware that one of the main EU fertiliser companies, and it would be a main supplier here in Northern Ireland, is actually doing a pilot on digital labelling in Germany, and that will make things convenient for farmers with the way things are going with high tech and with smartphones and things, in that the large bag of fertiliser there will have a chip on it, and that can be scanned, and then that will bring up information. So as well, going forward with fertilisers, it's important that yes, the basics are there, but look, having more detailed information is useful as well. And now with fertilisers and nutrient management on farms, certainly on advanced farms where there's a lot of technology used and things, it's getting very high tech with nutrient management plans, and even for applying fertilisers that can be done by GPS, and the amount of fertiliser that can be put onto a field can be varied depending on what part of the field needs it. So that it's getting a more complex area. So this move to digitalisation of labels and things, fits in with that as well. But as well as it being voluntary, of course, when there's a digital label, the bag of fertiliser will still have to have some of the main key things on the label. And that'll be the nutrient content, but also the environmental data and the safety data. So by moving to digital labelling, it won't take anything away of that basic thing, but what it is, it's providing more information there behind that without having a large cluttered label. So that's really a summary of where we are with it. But I would say that there's, this is something that it's voluntary, and companies can choose to use it if they wish, and they won't have to. And if they don't have to, well, all the data and the essential things are still there on a label. So maybe it's good to have something that there don't appear to be any significant downsides on whatsoever. Yeah, and hopefully not really controversial either. Yeah.
Okay, that makes our life easier in this committee too.
Yeah.
So Brian, thank you very much for that very fulsome analysis of the legislation. If any member has any questions, can they indicate? No, it's pretty straightforward, Brian. Thank you both, Alan and Brian. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So, members, that was pretty straightforward. So, under paragraph 8.1 of Schedule 6B of the 1998 Act, this committee must decide today whether or not to hold an inquiry into the published replacement EU Act that has been notified. So, should the committee fail to decide, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold inquiry. So, having regard to that, having regard to the legal advice on whether it appears likely that the Replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or in part from the content or scope of the EU instrument which it replaces, and also having regard to the departmental initial assessment on whether it appears likely that the Replacement Act would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. Do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2024-2516, amending Regulation 2019-1009 as regards to the digital labelling of EU fertilising products? Declan?
I believe there's no basis for an inquiry, Philip.
Okay. Everybody happy? Mm-hmm. Okay. So.
Sorry, Jonathan.
Oh, Jonathan, you were wanting to. Jonathan? Can broadcast and let Jonathan in? That's you now, Jonathan.
Can you hear me, Chair? Yes.
Yep, can now.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks also for the presentations. And whilst I understand, there has been, conversations regarding DERA and what there is mutual recognition and whatnot as to what essentially would slip the net and what wouldn't. I suppose probably again, I did read through the memorandums that there was still some divergence, albeit it was saying maybe minor. But given some of the changes, particularly I think the UKG memorandum was published almost a year ago, there is an argument to suggest that DEFRA, for example, should be updating this to see if anything's changed, particularly in light of the UK internal market and those changes that was through the Safeguarding the Union document. So on that basis, I would propose that the committee do conduct an inquiry.
Owen?
Chair, just to say, I think the evidence that we've got today is crystal clear. We have to consider legally whether the instrument differs in scope. I don't believe it does. And then we have to consider the practical impact and whether it would have a significant negative impact that would persist. I don't believe anything that we've heard today suggests in any way that it would. In terms of the divergence piece, we've heard very clearly from DERA today that fertiliser manufacturers would have the opportunity to choose whether to market products under the Northern Ireland regulations, the UK regulations, or the EU regulations. And so I don't believe there's a coherent argument to make around risk of divergence. And so I would be supporting Declan's proposal on that basis.
Okay, so we've got two proposals. Declan's is first, so we're just going to move to a vote. Steve, sorry. Steve? Hold on a minute, Steve. Broadcasting?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Philip, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, brilliant, that's fine. Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm just trying to get in contact with the Ulster Farmers Union because, quite frankly, I don't really understand all the issues here. I'm just trying to get some updates on what the implications could potentially be. I sort of would be supporting Jonathan's view on it because, like, I don't have enough information to be able to make a decision not to have an inquiry on at the moment. But obviously, it'll be dependent on the committee. Just wanted that on the record.
Okay, so
but I have reached out to the Ulster Farmers Union to try and get some more clarity.
So the clerk's just keeping me right here. So I have to ask the specific question and then we take the vote on that as opposed to proposals. I'll re-ask it again. So do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2024-2516, amending Regulation 2019-1009 as regards to the digital labelling of EU fertiliser? So those in favour of holding an inquiry, raise their hand. 1, 2, 3. We can't see Joanne, so Joanne, we can't see you. So we've got 3 members indicating that they support an inquiry. Those who do not wish to hold an inquiry, raise their hand.
Okay. So the question on Jonathan's proposal that that the committee holds an inquiry. The ayes: Jonathan Buckley, Steve Aiken, David Brooks. The noes: Owen Tennyson, Kate Nicholl, Emma Sheeran, Declan Kearney and Philip McGuigan. So the proposal falls.
Okay. So moving on then, if members are content, I'm going to deal with items 7 and 8 on the agenda together because the two proposed acts are part of the European Commission's Single Market Emergency Instrument Package. So the relevant papers are at pages 87 to 102 of the meeting pack. Item 7 is the Single Market Emergency Instrument Regulation, and item 8 is the Single Market Emergency Instrument Directive. So these acts relate to the functioning of the internal market in relation to the free movement of goods among member states and are intended to ensure the security of supply chains in emergencies. So members will recall that on the 12th of September, as part of our work planning, the committee agreed to request departmental assessments of impact for these proposed acts. Both are pending publication in the EU official journal, so neither have been notified to us yet. The Executive Office has confirmed that both instruments relate to reserved areas of policy, with the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs and the Department for the Economy holding interests in the proposed regulations, and the Department of Justice and the Department for the Economy holding interests in the proposed directive. A departmental assessment of impact has been provided by DAERA for the proposed regulation insofar as it relates to fertiliser policy, which is devolved. DAERA has stated that from the information provided by DEFRA, it does not appear likely that there will be a significant impact. The assessment can be found at page 93 of the meeting pack. We haven't received any assessment of impact for the proposed directive. So for both proposed acts, we await provision of an explanatory memorandum from the British Government, which should therefore provide fuller information on the impact here. The Executive Office understands these are due to be completed early this month. So can I ask members if you are content that the Clerk contacts the Cabinet Office to request that the EMs are shared with the committee as soon as possible, and we will return to the proposed acts when these are received or when the committee is notified of the acts, whichever comes first. Everybody content? Steve, your hand raised. I'm not sure if that's for the previous item or this one. Previous one. Oh, lip reading. Okay, moving on then to item number 9, correspondence. There are no areas of correspondence. So, Chair's business then, item 10. Just to let you know, myself and David, the Deputy Chair, met with the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Committee on procedures on Monday past to discuss the Committee's request for provision to be made in standing orders for substitute members and proxy voting during periods of recess. So, during the meeting, it was confirmed that the Procedures Committee intend to bring forward a motion to the Assembly to amend standing orders to provide for substitute members for this committee. And hopefully this motion will be on the order paper before Christmas recess. After taking legal advice, the Procedures Committee doesn't intend to progress provision for proxy voting at this point. The legal advice that they got can't be shared outside of the Procedures Committee. So I am proposing that on this matter we request our own legal advice, just so we have a better understanding of the reasons why it has not been asked for. Are members content that we seek legal advice on this matter? Okay, content. So we discussed the matter of making provision for substitute members during recess periods only. Following our discussions, it seems sensible. So we asked initially for it to be for recess only, but following the discussion, it seems sensible not to restrict provision to periods of recess, but to provide some flexibility to cover other exceptional circumstances when members might not be able to attend a meeting. But the committee convention could be that it's only used during periods of recess unless there are exceptional circumstances. Are members content with that? Okay. So, just to advise everybody.
Joanne's indicating, Chair.
Joanne, yep, come on ahead. Can broadcast and let Joanne in. Yep, that's you now, Joanne.
Oh, it's just gone off again.
Off again. Hold on. There you are.
That's me now. Sorry, I wasn't allowed to unmute myself. Just with regard to the apologies, Chairman, I was in the meeting but had to take a call about our committee later on. Chairman, just with regard to this whole position of proxy and so on, I understand that, you know, the reasons why we would make it a convention. The difficulty is once it's a convention, it's very difficult to break it. You know, and the whole purpose of this is actually to make it easier for members. So what flexibility is there around convention to actually help us with this situation?
Well, I suppose it's entirely up to this committee what we decide and don't decide to do. I think from our point of view, initially we asked it for a recess because there's a very special reason why this committee should have additional flexibility, because we do meet, as we met this summer. We could potentially be meeting over the Christmas period, Easter, etc. So we do need a certain amount of flexibility. So it seems clear that we needed that flexibility. I mean, we're within our rights to say that we only use it for recess periods only, because that was initially what it was. But at the Procedures Committee, I say there was a bit of a discussion that, you know, there might be other exceptional circumstances in periods not during recess where you know, a wee bit more flexibility could be allowed, but that we as members and as this committee, that we have a convention ourselves, that it's really only in exceptional circumstances. And I understand the point that you're making, but I think we're all sensible enough that, you know, that the additional flexibility that this committee has been granted, it wouldn't be abused. David, you looking to come in?
Yes, Chair. Thanks very much. It was you've sort of covered it there. It was just to say, in the meeting that we had, we discussed that the extra flexibility was more about if, you know, there was someone who was in hospital or there was a significant reason why that would justify the use of substitute members outside of the recess period. In that sense, and we did say that just as the other committee intend to review this down the line, that we could also review if we get to a stage where we feel it is being abused in any way, that can be reviewed down the line. But that the extra flexibility is not to allow people to do it on a, you know, week by week basis, but just to facilitate if there are significant mitigating circumstances in which they intend to use it. Sure.
And just to follow on, I mean, obviously the Committee for Procedures haven't laid this yet, so this will come back to the committee. I mean, we will be given the opportunity of designing how we want this to work. So, for example, you know, how many days in advance of a period where you want a substitute member would you contact the clerk? So, I mean, we will be coming back to this in terms of designing how it operates in practice during the periods when we want it to operate, and we can have a fuller discussion maybe on the issue of convention. Jonathan? Broadcasting, can you allow Jonathan in? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I think that is sensible that, you know, we continue on that conversation about the element of flexibility. Like I think everybody is sensible enough to ensure that it is not abused, but we don't know by what means circumstances may arise. For example, given the nature of this committee and quite considerable votes, it's not like any other committee, certainly that I sit on or have sat on in previous times in the Assembly. So you could see an occasion like this committee will be away for a period, whether it's engaging with the UK Parliament or indeed over in Brussels. You know, that could happen to another committee. So I think it is only fair that we flesh that out and ensure that there is a pragmatism applied to that flexibility element.
And as I say, we'll be discussing this further, because we do have to work out when and how it's used, and the clerk and staff will draw up some operating proposals for us for consideration, and whenever that's coming back to us. So, I mean, at this stage, all we've got is the principle and the theory, and we have to work out the details. And as I say, the clerk will bring up some proposals later on for us to have a further discussion. Are people content? Okay, thank you. So, no notifications have been received today, members, and that means there's no statutory business for committee next week. So, we don't need to meet next week, am I correct in that?
There's no decisions
Oh yes,
to be
sorry.
made,
Aye.
but
There was planned item on the agenda which was consideration of an EU Act which hasn't yet been notified but was identified as a priority by the committee during its work planning process. So the EU Act concerns classification, labelling and packaging of substances and mixtures. It is expected that the Environmental Council will signal its approval of the text of the Act on Monday coming, the 14th of October. The Act will then be published a number of weeks later in the official journal and the committee will be notified thereafter. So a departmental assessment of impact and legal advice has already been received to the committee office, and RAISE will provide a list of stakeholders early next week. So rather than meet next week to agree a way forward on this single agenda item, our members content now to agree to schedule a briefing by legal services, schedule an evidence session with the relevant officials, and seek views from stakeholders via citizen space with a longer than usual deadline for response, say 4 weeks. All content? The Citizen Space Survey will launch if and when the Environment Council signals its approval for the text of the Act. So are members content with that approach? Saves us coming back next week just to deal with that one item. So, I have no other business. Any other business, members? No. So, moving then quickly to number 12, date, time, place of next meeting. So, next meeting, therefore, after that decision, is now the 24th of October 2024, 10 a.m. here in room 30. So, going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. Can I ask the Secretariat to close the meeting?
Committee Room 30. Sound.